Hi everyone, and welcome to today's math video where we are going to be, as you guessed it, dealing with circles. So some of the things that we're going to be looking at today are some brand new terminology that you might not have an understanding about. We're also going to be looking at a couple of formulas that will work for circumference. And then more importantly, and I find that this is one of the harder things that students have a hard time conceptualizing, is working backwards from a formula. Once you have a number, how can you work backwards to find something else? Kids seem to really struggle with that. So before we begin, let's start like we always do, asking you to hit the subscribe button and the like button if you haven't done so already. So we've got two circles, but before we can begin, we have to have an understanding about what it is that we're trying to be asked about here. So I've got two formulas up here. I've got C is equal to pi times D, and I've got C is equal to 2 times pi times R. Now, if pi is something that you are unfamiliar with, pi is simply a circumference divided by diameter, and that's going to give you a number that is always going to be roughly 3.14. Roughly 3.14. So pi, in our case, is going to be a constant of 3.14 in this case. Okay, so keep that in mind as we move through this. It will not change. Okay, now if you hit the pi button on your calculator, it is a really long number. We're talking like trillions of decimals. For most math, we are okay with 3.14. Sometimes we push it to 3.142, but for us, we're just going to keep it as 3.14 just to keep it friendly. So with that in mind, let's talk about what this equals here. So we have C is circumference. And you might not have an understanding of what circumference is. Circumference is simply the distance around a circle. So if I was started here and went 360 degrees around, I would end up back at my starting point. That is the size of the distance around the circle. So think about it this way. If I had a piece of paper and I took it and folded it into a circle or rolled it into a circle and I cut here and stretched it out, a circle is simply just a line that is rolled up. And that is going to be the length of the line. We're looking for the length of that line. Okay? So let me draw that out, see if you can't conceptualize that a little bit better here. If I cut, like let's say right about there, and I took this and folded it out, this would eventually just kind of stretch out this way and stretch out the same distance this way, and it would unroll. And as it unrolled, it would become the length of this line. Okay? So if I took this line and I folded it back up and it touched here again and created a perfect circle, that's all circumference is. I'm looking for the length of that line rolled up. Okay? So let's get rid of that blue there so it doesn't become confusing. But that's all a circle is, really. It's just a line that's been rolled. So let's talk about these two formulas. We just talked about what circumference is. Now we need to talk about what pi is. We know that, but we don't know what D and R are. If you take a look here, D is the line going across the middle of a circle. And we call that diameter. It is the diameter of the circle. And essentially what it means is if I was to start here and go across the middle, it has to go across the middle, otherwise it doesn't count. It is the same as going from here to here, here to here, here to here. It is called equidistant. Equidistant means that it is the exact same length no matter where you go, as long as you're crossing the exact same point in the middle. Then you should have D is the same regardless. Same with this. R, if we look at R, R stands for radius. Radius essentially is half of diameter. So if you took a look here, if I put a little dot at center, this would be 5 and that half would be 5. 5 plus 5 is 10. Now there is a mathematical formula that we do use to solve radius and diameter if we have one or the other. In this case, we have D divided by 2 is R. So if I took D, split it in half, or divided it by 2, I would end up with 5. If I took R and multiplied it by 2, so two groups of the same distance, I would have D. We'll keep those there just for a visual reference in case you're not familiar with it. But now, Let's get to the solving of this. So we have two formulas here, and there's a reason that we have two formulas, because both these formulas work. They get to the same answer, and one sometimes can be more effective than the other. So we'll take a look at it. Before we get into solving, though, let's talk a little bit about formulas. Formulas, if you understand them, they're pretty easy, because all we have to do is plug in the numbers that we know. And if you take a look here, do we know c? Currently we don't. But do we know pi? Yes, pi is always going to be equal to that. And do we have d? D is 10. So let's do that math. If I'm following this formula right here, because I know the diameter, c is going to be equal to pi times diameter. C is going to be equal to 3.14 times diameter, which is 10. C is therefore going to have a distance around of 31.4. Now, this will have a unit of measurement, so it could be centimeters, it could be millimeters. In this case, we'll make it centimeters. So we'll call it centimeters. Now, the reason it's not centimeters squared is because it's just a line. Okay, we're not squaring it and creating a square out of it. We're just creating a line, which just means that we're simply centimeters. So that's this formula right here. You can see that when we have the diameter, all we need to do is plug in the d, plug in the pi, and then calculate it. We end up with a number. That's circumference. Let's switch gears to this guy, 2 times pi times r. If we have c is equal to 2 times pi times r, c is equal to 2 times pi times r, c is going to be equal to 2, which is not going to change, times pi, which is 3.14. Kind of butchered that writing right there. Not a very good erasing job either. 3.14 times r, which is going to be 5. Now, if I take and put these together, do some multiplication here, you can see that 2 times 5 is 10, times 3.14. 10 times 3.14 was exactly what I got here, 3.14. So you can see the relationship between having the radius, multiplying it by 2, and then multiplying it by pi to get the same answer. Those are both the same answers. So that's how these formulas work. It's simply just plugging in the numbers. Now, I mentioned at the top of the video that we were going to look at something that kids really struggle with. And that's what happens, that should say 31.4. I messed that up, sorry, just caught it on my eye. What happens if you have circumference and you need to work backwards? Well, for some kids it becomes a real struggle to picture, what do I do? What do we think about here in this case? But I don't want you to get upset by it. I don't want you to think like it can't be done, because it's a lot simpler than you think. Let's think all the way back to grade 2, grade 3, maybe, where we introduced a thing called fact families. Fact families. Where if we had, let's say, 2 times 3 was 6, then 3 times 2 had to equal 6 as well. We just switched the order. But if we had 6 over on this side, we could divide it by 2 to get the missing number of 3. And we could do the exact same thing, divide it by 3 to get 2. So you can see that the numbers are all the same. 2 and 3 and 6, 3 and 2 and 6, 6 and 2 and 3, 6 and 3 and 2. They're all the same. So if we have these formulas, we should be able to work backwards. And we'll use this kind of as our learning, our conceptual thinking of that. Let's start with this guy right here. C is equal to pi times d. Let's say I have the circumference of 31.4. Let's say I'm trying to find diameter. So in this case, where c was equal to pi times d, I'm going to start with my unknown first. I'm going to start with d. I'll switch it to yellow because I did everything on the first one in yellow. I'm going to switch it over here. Yeah, well, maybe we can squeeze it in here. I'm going to start with d. D is going to be equal to circumference divided by pi. Because I know the circumference is 31.4, and I know pi, and I don't have this. This is my unknown. I don't know that yet. So mathematically, let's think about this. If I take diameter, or circumference, 31.4, and divide it by pi, which is 3.14, my diameter is going to be equal to what I had here, which is 10. And again, it'll have a unit of measurement like centimeters. All I did was move the order of these. I put 1 on the other side of equals and did the inverse operation. And that works all the time, even if I did it with this one right here, where I have 2 times pi times r. If I switched it around, maybe I wanted to find r. R is going to be equal to circumference divided by 2 divided by pi. I'm doing the inverse operations. I'm moving the r over here and then taking the smaller numbers, what I know, and moving them to the other side. So in this case, I'll have r is equal to circumference, which is 31.4 divided by 2 divided by pi, 3.14. So r in this case is going to be, what do we got here, 16.7? 15.7? 15.7 divided by 3.14. R is going to be equal to 5. And it's going to be the same thing. We simply just change the order of the unknown and inverse the operation. So there's a ton of learning that we just did here. We looked at multiple formulas. We looked at circumference if we knew the diameter. We looked at circumference if we knew the radius. If we had the radius, could we still do this? Absolutely. We'll just simply take r times 2 and figure that out. We also looked at what we can do if we worked backwards. If we had the circumference and we needed to work our way backwards from here, and we ended up with the same answer that we started with. So the 5 and the 5 and the 10 and the 10. What I would invite you to do is rewatch this video, see if you can't wrap your head around it. If you can't, then drop a comment down below and I'll see what I can do about making it a little bit better or trying to answer your question in any capacity that I possibly can. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you again in the next video. Talk soon.